Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Revolution Radio Live right here on the TruthNet Radio Network. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. It's my guest, Scott Stevens. I don't have an official biography for him, so I'm just going to introduce him as best I can. He is a meteorologist and a chemtrails expert. He's been involved in the field of meteorology for quite some time, and he's also a storm chaser. And he joins us here tonight on Revolution Radio. Mr. Stevens, how are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing great. Honored to be on your show this evening. And what caught my interest in weather modification was a sidebar on Colonel Tom Bearden's website, chenier.org. And I was there because I was researching dark energy or energy from the vacuum, those kind of topics. And Colonel Bearden had a sidebar on his website which was titled Soviet Weather Engineering. And he laid out a rather interesting story that Tesla Technologies from Nikola Tesla back in the early part of the 19th century had been deployed by militaries around the world or by leading labs literally in the mastering of longitudinal EM waves. These are fantastic waves which can contain an incredible amount of power, and the passage of these waves is not attenuated by matter, meaning the antenna can point through the Earth and be focused on the other side of the planet and still have an effect, and literally most of the energy transmitted arrives at its intended destination. And Colonel Bearden went on to tell a story that the Russians were the first in this game, and that beginning in July of 1976, ham radio operators around the world began to hear what was termed the Russian woodpecker grid. It was a kind of a pulsing at varying frequencies and intensities in the shortwave frequency of 3 to about 30 megahertz. And Colonel Bearden's assertion is that this was the beginning of global weather modification operations.
Wow.
And on his site, he provided some interesting clouds, which is, as a meteorologist, I was certainly curious in. And that also gave me a template to begin to look into my skies to see if I was seeing these odd grids, these radial patterns, these spoked clouds, and so forth.
Experience with it, what is it that, in your experience and the tests that you've done, what is it that they're dumping on us?
Well, the chemtrails was just kind of a sidebar for me as well. I was far more interested in the electromagnetic manipulation of the atmosphere, the odd shape of clouds, the ability to heat and cool targeted layers in the atmosphere and accentuate storm development. How I ended up in the chemtrail camp, essentially, was that you can't have these kind of condensation trails, contrails in the sky without them affecting the energy budget of the planet in some form or another. When you're increasing the layers of high clouds specifically literally by doubling the amount of high clouds in the last 10 years, you change the energy budget of this planet, and that should be very important in this time of planetary warming to everyone. Sierra Club, Environmental Defense, EPA, they should all be concerned about this explosion in high cloud cover. But what I did in early 2005 was put 4 cameras at the cardinal points outside my house because I wanted to see the odd things that the clouds were doing. And after about 4 months of looking at time lapse, essentially you take the sky and you speed it up to 120 times normal speed. And let me tell you, things make a whole lot more sense at that speed. So what I was seeing was an organization to the pattern that the planes were flying. You would have a plane cross the sky, leave a trail of nearly the entire distance, but within that trail there would be gaps, or there would be tears, or there would be curls, or there would be spiraling. And what was curious is that almost immediately, inside of 2 minutes, another plane would come along and mark or bisect these zones where in the first trail there was a deformation of some kind. And so what became readily apparent is that they were using these chemtrails as electric wires run through the sky. And that's why we find aluminum oxides. That's why we find barium sulfates embedded within these trails, is that they're conducting electricity. And when you run these thin wires through the sky, because the electromagnetic weapon has essentially taken the atmosphere and sliced it into layers, they need to fly these planes through these layers to ascertain the behavior of the weather. If you want to accentuate a thunderstorm's development, you essentially take heat out of the top of the storm. Above 25,000 feet, say 25 to 50,000 feet, you extract heat, and that storm will explode in development. At the same, on the flip side of that is you create an inversion or a cap, and you deposit warm air above, say, a half a state, and that caps the atmosphere so there's no storm development. And on days when rain is forecast and you see lots of trails, it's a very, very good clue that you're not likely to get as much rain or as much thunderstorm activity as you would have otherwise in a natural state. So the weather, the chemtrails are used as surveillance for the targeting and the measuring of the behavior of these electromagnetic weapons. There are other agendas that will use these planes. I mean, once you spend $2+ trillion on aircraft and chemicals and have the supply lines in place, you use it to its fullest extent. I mean, the proper capitalist wouldn't. The proper government wouldn't. And so they are. And if that means biologicals get delivered from time to time as well in their experimentations, then that happens. And that has shown up in water tests and samples.
Okay, so
we're really deep.
So basically what you're saying, I mean, they have indeed found toxins in these chemtrails, and what kinds specifically have they found?
Well, aluminum and barium are huge. I mean, that's almost the glue that holds these chemtrails together. And with a HARP-like system, you can get literally a volume or 3 or 4D radar snap of the atmosphere. And these are like chalk lines in the wind. There are also water samples which have come back with very unusual DNA signatures. So you wonder what kind of genetic powder that may be mixed into this. And Morgellons disease is a very curious affliction. We have lots and lots of upper respiratory issues that can be compounded by the inhalation of these chemical mixtures. You know, in the past, a flu would last 3 days. I mean, 15, 20 years ago. And now flus last a week or two. And there's always a secondary issue that shows up, whether it's a sinus infection, whether it's, you talk to ERs, you talk to nurses' offices, you talk to doctors' offices, and they all say it's changed. It's changed, and these things are not stuck in a particular season. You know, winter or spring, they're spread throughout the year. And I'd really like to see CDC records for emergency room visits for respiratory issues.
Oh,
I think
exactly.
it would be very revealing research. And because we've seen these trails in the sky, and because we have changes in air sampling and in water sampling beginning profoundly in 95, 96, then we're at least 10, 11, 12 years into the general population breathing these mixtures, breathing this increasing quantity of airborne delivered chemicals. Wow. You know, and even if it is completely just for weather modification and tweaking the climate, there is collateral damage, and that is our health.
Yeah, it is. And
have you heard of a gal named Rosalind Peterson in Northern California?
I've heard the name.
Yeah, her website is California Skywatch, and she's amassed an incredible database of water tests from separate Northern California water systems where there's just all of a sudden there's these spikes of these chemicals, and there's nothing connecting these multiple water systems. And so the only delivery system for these anomalous chemicals in the water systems is through the atmosphere. That is the only thing that enjoins them.
Wow.
And we see these tests showing up in British Columbia, close to the Pacific Ocean. You know, we're getting some stuff from China. That's a given with their grotesque levels of pollution over there.
Oh, yeah.
But the Pacific is pretty good at cleansing and absorbing a lot of that. So we're getting fresh delivery. Even today off the coast of British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, you know, out every bit of 800 miles, the chemtrails were working. These engineering planes were working the next inbound Pacific storm.
Wow.
And so these operations are global and not limited to metro areas here in the States. It is a global weather operation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's going on all over the place. All right. Well, moving on, I wanted to talk to you. I was anxious to ask you about this. I've been actually anxious since you told me you'd come on to talk to you about this. Weather forecasting. it's become a real thorn in my side. I'll tell you. I didn't when I was about.
Tell me about it.
Oh, I know, and I'm sure to you it's been.
I mean, dude, why try?
Yeah,
why bloody try?
Exactly. To you,
know,
it's
and that was why it was so easy to walk away from it. Is because you were already dealing with a certain level of uncertainty because we don't understand the atmosphere in its entirety and completely.
Right.
But then when you take this delta, this change that is unknown, it becomes a near impossibility.
Yeah,
you can't explain the bizarreness that shows up.
Exactly.
How you can get 3 inches of rain out of a semi-arid atmosphere, and it's bizarre. You've got snowstorms on the East Coast with the atmosphere containing a half inch of water. And that's pretty good for snow and for winter, but you're still able to generate 2 feet of snow from that. It's just incredible.
Right.
So what we're seeing is event after event after event that is 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 standard deviations beyond normal. And you can't account for that with a 1 degree rise in ocean temperatures. It doesn't explain it. It's an excuse.
Or down here.
Well, because they started some 50, 60 years ago, and tried to do it, and they just have continued. What I'm curious about is at what level of NOAA, of the National of the National Weather Service, is this knowledge present? At what point, at how many levels, how high do you have to go before they know it's messed up? And for the longest time, the head of the National Weather Service was an Air Force Brigadier General. Well, he's got clearance. He's going to be aware of what's going on. But the local offices are I talked to many of them, and they're clueless.
Well, actually,
they are clueless.
Yeah, actually, it's not the National Hurricane Center who releases that. It's some university in Colorado or something. Now that I think
it is.
Yeah.
It's here. It's Dr. Gray at Colorado
That's
State University.
Dr. Gray, right. Okay, so it's not the Hurricane Center. It's some guy out in Colorado who lives nowhere near Hurricane Alley. So,
and he's a hurricane researcher, but once again, he's stuck in the old paradigm that it is all heat and humidity.
Right.
And this is what we've been trying to work on with our storm chasing. Is we'll take magnetometers measuring the magnetic field in Gauss, and we lay them out in front of rotating thunderstorms or mesos, and we hope that we get one that goes tornadic, but that's really a challenge. And what we've measured is that there's a profound drop in the magnetic field underneath these storms, and it is a very small, it is a very tightly wound up core. And as we know, all electricity generated nearly all generated in this country is at the hands of something rotating, some kind of turbine, whether it's driven by the wind or natural gas or coal. It is a spinning turbine, which then generates the electrical field. And you just stand that turbine up on its end, and it's called a thunderstorm. And it creates sparks and lightning and so forth. And the very powerful ones, the positively charged ones, will even send their lightning high into the ionosphere in the form of sprites. And then negative or garden variety thunderstorms with negative polarity will strike the ground and go cloud to cloud and so forth.
Right.
And so there's this entire electrical sphere. I mean, Earth is a spinning battery, period. And there is an immense amount of electrical and electromagnetic energy available for it to utilize within the weather processes. And that's what's missing in forecasting. When we understand that, then we will have incredibly accurate forecasts, and indeed the lever to control the weather will be readily apparent to all, and it'll eventually happen.